This is Father Joseph Anthony Kress.
And this is Father Gregory Pine.
Welcome to Godsplaining. Thank you to all who support us. And if you enjoy this episode, please consider making a monthly donation on our Patreon page. Please be sure to like, subscribe, comment to this episode wherever you listen to your podcast. Father Gregory.
Hello.
We're back at it.
We are.
Always.
Yep.
If you were to be a breakfast cereal, what breakfast cereal would you be?
Wow, that's a great question that I haven't thought of for 1 second prior to the present second. Yeah, that's so I like to think about myself, or I like to think of myself that I am not cloying. I like that word cloying.
Cloying.
It's like so sweet.
Hey.
It kind of taxes your patience. You know, so there's like a lot of cereals which they deliver quite a wonderful taste sensation, but I find that they don't last well, or they don't like sustain the flavor. So like last well, like some of them just come to pieces.
Yeah,
right.
They
just
get
disintegrate,
soggy, yeah.
Or like sustain the flavor, like they're just a little too sugary, like almost like distractingly sugary. Like these are all possibilities. But then on the other hand, you don't want to go like just Cheerios because they're ring shaped, like inflated rice cardboard or oat cardboard.
Oats, yeah. I think
Which is like
oats.
if you self-describe in such a fashion, then you've kind of given up on being charming or otherwise scintillating in conversation.
Yeah.
So you have to hold interest, but you can't be so superficial as to come to pieces or cloy. So I think I'm going to go with this is so hard.
Right.
Nature Valley granola.
Oh, wow. Didn't see that coming.
Yeah, so this is the thing, because there's actually a kind of granola that Nature Valley makes, which as far as I can tell, is just the granola bars that broke at the factory.
Right.
Or like fell on the ground.
They bag them up.
They bag them up and they sell it to you as if it were an intentional granola choice, which I love because I like kind of a man for all seasons, kind of earthy, gritty.
Totally.
I have a little bit of the factory floor there.
You definitely do.
And but also like, I'm not going to waste. Like every encounter is precious. There's something to be gained from it. Not in like a let's gain something from it, but like this might be fun. Let's see how this goes. There's a little bit of sweet in them, but I find that you can eat those things all life long without negative consequences.
Oh, I love that.
Unless there is plaque building up in my aorta right now as a result of them, and then maybe there are negative consequences.
Could be.
Yeah, how about you?
Ooh, I mean, I feel like my go-to favorite breakfast cereal is not what I would identify as.
Right. What is it?
CTC.
Is that Cinnamon Toast Crunch?
Yeah, right there.
Nice.
Cinnamon Toast Crunch, baby. That is my go-to breakfast cereal. Okay. That was when, my dad would work an extra shift. He would work a double a week or something like that. And we can get some, CTC as a fun breakfast cereal. But the standard in our house was Honey Nut Cheerios.
Oh, okay.
And still is. Like when I go back to visit my parents, like there's always a box of Honey Nut Cheerios.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of nostalgia there. But I think there's something to that I think I would probably choose that. Because there's like the sweetness of the honey in there, but it is the classic cereal. But it's not going to go too far to extreme to be like this, like flashy, like you said, overly sugary experience. Sugarly. So it's not like the
Sugar Plum Fairy.
I was almost tempted to say Apple Jacks.
Ah, okay.
They have that kind of, but like they can get super soggy and then lose all kind of
interest.
Yeah.
They kind of suck the joy out of life. Even whilst promising to infuse joy into life. Paradoxical that.
Could be. I think I would just go with the classic Honey Nut Cheerios. Okay. And I just always loved the back of the box as a kid. There was always like a maze or a circle the word thing with the B. I forget. Yeah. I'm sure he has a name.
Undoubtedly.
Marketing geniuses would definitely name him something catchy and whatnot. But yeah, I always loved those types of things.
Yeah.
There's nothing like a good morning of Honey Nut Cheerios, a glass of Sunny D, and ESPN SportsCenter's top 10 plays. Wow. That was my childhood right there.
That's incredible. That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
That makes me nostalgic.
It does. And so the reason why I bring that up is not because we're trying to find fun personality quirks to share with our listeners. You're welcome. We do have personalities. Thank you so much. But we are having a discussion on this episode to discuss about morning people. There's a way to identify people. People are either I'm a morning bird or I'm a night owl. Like I'm a morning person. I love it. It's great. And they tend to be very almost in the line of like vegans, like you'll know a morning person because they'll let you know they're a morning person.
Fascinating. You
right?
think that about them?
I do.
And by them, I mean us.
Well,
Yeah.
I try to hide it.
Okay.
All
right.
But I don't identify as that.
You don't.
I don't.
Yeah.
But
You tolerate those
I
people.
do.
Okay.
I really do. But why? There are people that are just like absolutely convicted it's the best thing and it revolutionizes and it changes everything. And this should be what everybody does.
Sure.
But we also know by life experiences that there are many people who despise the mornings and don't do well in that. So is there a positive to it? Should we all be morning people? The chronological vegans, as maybe we should call them, or not? Or should it be okay to be a night owl and a night person? What are we talking about there? So that's what we want to discuss in this episode. At least that's what I'm proposing. Yeah, I know. But
I
kind of self-identified as morning person. So break that open for me a little bit here.
Yeah, it's maybe like the genealogical approach or the historical approach to this revelation is most appropriate because I feel like it, like when you tell people like St. Thomas Aquinas is a great saint and all they've ever encountered is like Summa Theologies type stuff, they're like, yikes. But if you tell them the story of his sanctity, that endears him to them and then they're more likely to profit from his theological writings. Of course. So I'm going to tell you the story of my morning personhood.
Okay.
So I would say, like, I don't know that I woke up with alacrity, with rings on my fingers and bells on my toes as a young lad. But it was in high school, so running, cross country, and track. We had 2-a-days, anywhere between 2 and 4 days a week during the school year. So class started in high school at like 7:33 a.m. That was our first period. But you were supposed to be at practice at 6:15, which means that you were to be bright-eyed and bushy-tailed at like, 5:20-ish.
Right.
So that way you could do the things antecedent to the leaving the house and arriving at said practice.
Of course.
And that was kind of rueful, baneful, terrible.
Yeah.
It was rough. That's what I'm trying to say. It took me a while to get there because I began anticipating the early alarm, and then that cast a pall over the day.
Yeah.
It cast a pall over the evening and the night, and it would sometimes kind of strike a little bit of fearful anxiety into the core of my being, thus making it such that it was hard to sleep in general. So like already the transition to morning person, it was costly. All right. But then when I showed up at Steubenville, my sister was in the habit of going to morning mass because it was the only mass that she could attend with dread frequency. Because the other masses, sometimes you had classes that conflicted with them, but nothing conflicted with the 6:30 a.m. mass at Franciscan University of Steubenville. So we would do that together. And then I started liking it. And I think it was like the pleasant association of morning and prayer that got me kind of in the habit of mornings. And then we went to the novitiate, and we were all woken up at the same time. Yeah. And then that, association of morning and prayer continued. And then I just found myself kind of like drunk on the delicious liqueur, which is the morning lights, the morning ambiance. There's something about the quality of the morning, which is, in my experience, plentiful.
Yeah.
So that's like kind of how I came to it, without making a judgment as to better or worse, whether everyone needs to be or not. But for me, it was like a kind of discovery of a certain virginal experience of my day, untouched, uncontaminated, and just wonderful that commended it to me. And so that's where I am at this point. But it sounds like you're more of a night owl, or it sounds like you're at the very least not a morning person.
Yeah. No, I grew up as a night owl.
Okay.
Like I remember like as a young kid kind of staying up to watch Jay Leno's headline segment, like late night TV. And I kind of like nod off and fall asleep ahead of time, but I always wanted, like, that was like something, staying up to watch like SNL, those types of things. 90s Saturday Night Live was fantastic. Chris Farley, one of the best.
Yeah.
But I don't know. So just like, I always remember growing up and it was just like, I could stay up late. And I had always done that, throughout college and things like that. So like my natural disposition was always to be awake at the nighttime. And I remember growing up, like we'd always go to the latest mass on Sundays. It was like an 11:30 mass. It was like that was our mass. It was like the late mass.
Yeah.
And we would choose kind of the latest possible option in the morning for anything. And just to like have that kind of rhythm built into you is like, okay, you try to get as much sleep as you can so that you can stay up late or those types of things. And that was just a rhythm. So for me, it's pretty much a natural disposition. I can stay up late and it doesn't bother me. It doesn't faze me. I'd rather if we're traveling or something, it's like, yeah, I can hop in the car and drive 2 or 3 hours, through the middle of the night. And that's perfectly fine. And I'm used to that. And so I'm okay with that. But I have, as of last 2 years, 3 years or something, I've kind of recalibrated in a sense and have really kind of prioritized mornings. I've talked about this, I think, with episodes with you. It's my natural dispositions for the night, but I recognize that my best prayer is always in the morning.
Yeah.
I pray best in the morning. So it's really difficult when something that I have to have is part of my day, like it's the air I breathe, is my prayer, and it doesn't match with my natural disposition. So I have to prioritize morning prayer, even though it doesn't match with when I'm naturally always awake. And that was a really difficult shift in trying to make that work. You make it, you build up habits, and everything's fine, and people are happy, and Jesus is Lord. So I have made the shift to that, and I have had grown an appreciation for the morning time, similar to what you say. Is I always used to love sunsets, but I also now really, really, really love sunrises. I love sunrises, and to have that appreciation for that. There's something about when you get up before even the sun cracks the first light of the day. There's a beauty there in that. So I think as we were talking about this, and we can talk about some of the benefits and things like that.
Yeah.
While we say is it may not be for everybody, and is it better to prioritize this or to maybe lean in one direction or not? But you mentioned something that kind of stillness and the quiet of the morning is for you almost invigorating.
Yeah.
Right. And I find something similar in my own life, and I've met a number of people who get up early in the morning and they say things similar. But there's also a quiet in the late night.
There is.
So is there a difference to the qualities of a morning quiet, a morning stillness versus a late night quiet and a late night stillness?
I think this kind of gets us to the heart of our question, because it's if, you're a morning person or not, should you be a morning person irrespective? Is there a moral quality to be assigned to our morning lives? Is it just part and parcel of Christian existence to be there in the morning on your knees or in the pew or doing whatever else? Or, if we define ourselves as night owl or a morning person, are we defining ourselves by our weaknesses or by our strengths, relatively speaking? And do we find ourselves caught in easy tropes just because we have a kind of cultural background against which? I think that, at the very least, we can say that there are good things to both. And when you choose one, you typically have to choose against the other and even mourn the loss of the other.
Yes.
So for me, choosing for the morning has meant mourning the loss, as choosing against and mourning the loss of the night. Because there are, like you said, things that are precious about both. And you can get a kind of, for me, I really like the solitude that comes with both. But it's a kind of pregnant solitude, a kind of rich solitude. So I would say that the stillness of the night is euphoric. The stillness of the morning is calm. There's a kind of chargedness, I think, to the night for me. And there's a kind of pleasantness to the morning for me. And I can get a lot of stuff done, or I could get a lot of stuff done at night previously, but I can no longer anymore because I've tended in the direction of the morning. And so there are negative effects of that, or there are things about that which I don't love. So when I'm in a conversation, even a really wonderful conversation with somebody, and it's 9:30, I'm thinking about going to bed. I'm already ending this conversation mentally, and a lot of times the person registers that and feels maybe judged or foreclosed on, which is sad, but this is the shape of my life, you know?
Right.
And, you have to make that judgment in light of who you are and what you're for, in light of your state, in light of your employment, in light of whatever else. Those are all facts, and sometimes we just need to be reconciled to the facts. But I am, in a certain sense, sad that I don't feel the same kind of reckless abandon with respect to the night as I did previously. Because the choices that bind me to the morning, in a certain sense, have kind of shut me out from the night. But I think that's true of any human process of maturation. It's you close doors so as to pass through others.
Well, yeah.
I
mean, every yes has an implied no to it, and every no has an implied yes to it. So there's the trade-off with respect to the morning or the night. And I think I'll throw this out there. I think there's a bad kind of association that people who prefer the mornings are kind of introverts. and people who like the nights are extroverts. Like you said, there's kind of a solitude in the morning. It's different than the quiet of the night, and just generally the nighttime tends to be more social, so like, and I want to kind of maybe push back against that, and I don't necessarily agree like that. I can see where those things are founded, but I don't want to immediately assume people that, if you're a morning person, then you're this deep introvert and want to enjoy. You just want your personal time away from everybody. There's an important to having solitude in our life that all of us need, and I think the morning is more apt for that.
Yeah,
And it is a little more conducive to those types of things. So. Let's talk about the benefits of the morning. It's part of your life, has been for a while. I've intentionally prioritized that as of recent in my life. But let's talk about like why is it important to, get up early in the morning?
Yeah.
Not absurdly early, but like, within the Christian tradition and within our lives, what are the benefits of it? Why do that?
Yeah, so it'll depend in part on your state in life, but I think that you have a greater control, or you have a kind of greater freedom, perhaps, in structuring the morning, because nights, it seems to me, have a tendency to get away from us quicker, and there's more programming at nights, which makes it harder for us to ensure steady habits during the nights. Whereas in the morning, you have a modicum of control and you can delimit the bounds of your freedom and say, I'm going to always wake up 20 minutes before I need to so that I can pray for those 20 minutes. Now, if you've got children who are waking up at kind of volatile times, or if you work a swing shift, or if your current employee is irregular or whatever else, there are things, there are reasons for which the mornings might be volatile, but I think they tend to be less volatile than the nights. And so I would say a kind of consistency and a kind of stability. Also, like a lot of people, everyone's kind of dealing with their stuff mentally and emotionally, or psychologically and emotionally. And I think that there's a sense in which the day tends to get kind of more intense. It tends to get more agitated and like kind of anguished as we come to recognize all that's expected of us and all that has to be done, and we find more excuses or more kind of pretexts for setting aside things which we know are important but may not be as urgent. And so I think that there's a kind of clarity of vision that comes with the morning. Like, this is important to me. I want to invest in this, and I'm going to do those important things so that whatever comes next is, in a certain sense, gravy. It might be very important. It might be required of me because of my state of life or my employment. But nevertheless, it will have come after I prayed. And so I think that there's a sense in which, like, because you have greater control over it, right? Because you have a kind of clarity of vision, because there are fewer incursions from other responsibilities, oftentimes it's a place in which we can do the habitual good with greater constancy. And I think the people often think about it in terms of prayer or going to mass. Those would be the ways in which we see it most clearly. But obviously there are other things that you can kind of slot into the morning that you are committed to, or that you find to be especially important or precious. But that would be just kind of like a base of operations for further exploration. Yeah,
I think I have two things to say in that vein. One's just more of kind of a habitual humanistic side of things, and the other is a little more spiritual. The first is one of the things I'm telling a lot of my students right now is the importance of picking a bedtime and picking a wake up time, and that those are consistent. And the reason why I say that, especially on the wake up time, is that time that you wake up, whatever you decide it to be, is of itself. And what I mean by that is, like, I'll have conversations with students. It's like, hey, what time do you typically wake up? And they look back on things. They're like, well, my first class on Mondays and Wednesdays is 8:00, so I'll get up around like 7 because it takes me a half hour to get ready and then a half hour to walk to class. And then Tuesdays and Thursdays, I don't have class till 11, so I'm typically, I won't set an alarm and wake up when I wake up. And I want to like push back against that. And I'm like, no, you need to pick a time to wake up that is not dependent on your first obligation of the day. Like, it's so important to be able to have a consistent time that you wake up and expectations of that. And then you can roll that back. If you're going to get up at, 6 a.m., you got to roll that back. Then that means to get a full 8 hours of sleep, you should be going to sleep in the 10 o'clock hour, and like you can have that kind of consistency for it. But it's really important to pick a time to wake up that is, once again, not dependent on your obligations consistently. No, like you were saying, if you're working an off-hour shift or things like that, and kids will wake you up. But this is those are exceptions. But like the general rule there is to pick a time to wake up that's not dependent on your obligations. And then in that place, what do you do with that time? Like, because of the kind of quiet stillness and the pregnant stillness that the day has yet to happen, what do you do with that? Well, this is a beautiful time that you can use for reflection, for investing. Not that like this is all about control, because overexerting our control is also a bad thing, but we do need to have certain disciplines and not let life happen to us. And that's what I find when people will always wake up dependent on their obligations, is actually their life is controlling them. And they're becoming a slave to work, or they're becoming a slave to all these other things. But to have that opportunity to live life instead of life controlling you, I think is really important. And then the second point that I was going to bring up, which is, like I said, a little more of a spiritual point, is I found it's very, very important. I talked to some students a lot about beginning a life of prayer. Like, they encounter the Lord. I want to start praying. What do I do? And it's like, well, pick a time of day that you find you pray best. And if you don't know what that is, start with praying in the morning. And the reason why I go there is because that's what the Lord himself did. I remember earlier this year, one of our readings was talking about the Lord was healing a bunch of people and releasing them from demons and all this stuff. And then he got up early in the morning and went to a remote and deserted place to pray with the Father. He got up before everybody else did, and he spent that time in prayer with the Father before everything got started. And that is so important, to be able to have the first thing that we do in the day. We prioritize our relationship with God, and that's the first thing that we do with the day. And so if we're going to have a consistent time of prayer, like to imitate the Lord who did it early in the morning himself, and to not be afraid to do that as well.
Yeah, I think there can be a kind of like simplicity, a kind of docility, a kind of obedience in the choice to give it a go in the morning. There's some people who are never going to be morning people.
Yeah.
That's fine. And it's not always to be attributed as fault or blame or weakness or whatever else, right? There are totally valid reasons for which one might not be especially bright-eyed and bushy-tailed in the morning, or especially motivated to correct that. I totally get it. But there are certain things in our Christian lives which just need to be in place.
Yep.
And if we keep telling ourselves lies, if we keep telling ourselves half-truths to perpetuate immaturity, which keeps us from maturing into the saints whom God wants us to be, right, then that's a problem.
Yeah.
Right? And we need to address that in some way, albeit gently, because you're not just going to lay hold of your humanity and do with it what you will, because it just doesn't work that way. But by a simplicity, a kind of docility, a kind of obedience to the Christian tradition, we're open to a revelation and a grace which can conduct us from a relative immaturity to a relative maturity. And when we look at the saints, it's more often than not that they pray in the morning, that they rise and they pray. They make a morning offering, and they might spend 15 minutes reading the gospel, reflecting upon it, journaling a little bit, and then offering up some prayers of petition. What's to prevent me from doing that? What's to prevent me from looking at my maybe first obligation, if it's regularly recurring, and then thinking what time I need to wake up in order to get that first obligation, as I ought, and then backing that up the number of minutes that I want to pray every day, so that I can have a consistent practice, which is regular, which is like something that I can anticipate and expect, and as a result of which habituate. Sorry, that's a real word. And then kind of like work into my bones, rather than having to reinvent my life with the beginning of each new day, trying to remember who I am and what I'm doing, and then how that actually plays itself out in the concrete and particular details of the here and now.
Yeah, and I think that's important, is that you begin, as you build these habits, right, that you begin and not immediately jump into obligations and work, and that means approaching prayer not as obligatory, right? Approaching prayer as relational. Like, this is a time to encounter the Lord in Scripture. This is a time to speak to Him from the heart, and to set yourself up with that yeah, I want to prioritize this, but not as I have to get this in and check it off my day, but this is a time to spend with the Lord before things get chaotic and life imposes itself into my world, into me in many respects. So, what we have, I think, is looking at the Christian tradition, which has always prioritized early mornings as part of, sanctity in that sense. Once again, we're not saying that people who stay up late, myself included, are not striving for holiness or things like that. People who have trouble, falling asleep or things like that, those are not like manifestations of your, lack of virtue or anything like that. But it is something that I think that there is a priority into morning activity, especially with morning prayers for that. So I think as we kind of look at that, it can be something that we are encouraging because we've seen the Christian tradition kind of distill and purify that over the years, over the centuries, over the millennia, that, this is something that has consistently been conducive to a state of receptivity, reflection, holiness in that way.
Yeah. No, I think that when we read the sacred scriptures, when we consult the church's tradition, when we sit at the feet of its fathers and doctors and wise philosophers and theologians, when we consult the lives of the saints, we just see this borne out. And as a result of which we have a kind of certainty, or we have a kind of confidence that if we endeavor to do so, provided that we don't despair of the practice in some narrow time frame, that it will take hold. And I think this reveals to us the fact that all of life is formation.
Yep.
This is something that we really hammer home in the setting of religious life. We talk often about the form of the life.
Yes.
So for us, we don't talk so much about Dominican spirituality as we talk about the form of the life. You do the things which are prescribed for you in the rule and the constitutions with an openness to their logic, with a kind of openness to their formative power, and then you see what becomes, or you see what becomes of the life as it's lived in you, almost as if an observer. Now, mind you, you're the protagonist of that formation.
Yep.
It's Christ who works in you. It's Christ who gives his grace to you. And, like our constitutions say that you're primarily responsible for your own formation. But there's this sense that I'm not inventing it. I'm not even discovering it. I'm receiving it. And so when we consult the tradition, the scriptures and the tradition, those holy fathers and doctors and philosophers and theologians and the saints and all those besides, we approach them with this disposition of openness to the reception of formation. And so when others propose various goods which pertain to the church's life and her riches, we want to kind of receive that, whatever is shared with us. We want to judge that, and then we want to potentially incorporate that. People are going to recommend 1 billion things, and we're not going to be able to do 1 billion things. We might be able to do 5 things, but we can look to what the church proposes in her wisdom in hierarchical fashion, and then we can seek to incorporate that by small kind of human steps, cognizant of the fragility of our own human nature, the weakness and woundedness which besets us from start to finish, within a kind of desire, or with a kind of zeal even, for what lies on the other side, and a curiousness about how it's to unfold. So I think we can approach the mornings with that type of disposition, whether we're inclined to it or not.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think as we wrap up, do you have one piece of advice for somebody who's trying to make that transition to say, okay, I've listened to this episode, you got me convinced, Father Gregory, I need to prioritize my mornings. I'm maybe not going to self-identify as a morning person, but I am going to invest in the mornings. What's the number one tip to help actually begin that so that it does become a habit in their life?
So this is a tip from Reform Wellness, whom I've mentioned a couple of times on the podcast, but it's a tip from the Christian tradition and common sense. It's to avoid those things at the end of the night which are likely to keep you up. Now, this may be work-related tasks, answering of emails, the type of thing that you can do ad infinitum, even with low energy, which will burn you and leave you kind of raw the next morning and less likely to profit from the graces of that morning. For other people, it might be like just doom scrolling. So Reform will say, turn your phone off an hour before your bedtime and don't look at it for the first hour of the day to create a kind of space such that your night takes its ordinary course. You're not looking at a screen for the last hour of the day, and that your morning is able to kind of flower or blossom as it's intended to, rather than being kicked right into a kind of stressful or otherwise gear.
Yeah.
So I think that those are very simple things whereby we can go to bed when we want to, rather than an hour after we want to, and we can wake up with a disposition of kind of like curiosity about our experience and openness to whatever it is that the Lord wants to give.
I think my advice is, I know I asked for one, but I want to give two because whatever, that's what I do. I think the first thing is put your alarm clock across the room. You know, I think this is something that I took a cue from you a few Lents ago, and I did that as my Lenten penance. Was I put my alarm clock across the room, so I actually had to physically get out of bed and walk across the room to turn it off, and that way it does help you to kind of start the physicality of forcing you to get across the room does help you to get moving on the day. I think one of the other things is that I would encourage is to put yourself in a position to, honestly, just put yourself in a position that you can watch the sunrise. I know not everybody can do that. If that's, put your prayer chair, your reading chair in the morning next to the window. If it's east facing, do that. Even if it's not, try to try to take a walk in the morning, get something. The beauty of nature as it begins to wake up, and to allow yourself to be in harmony with that, because that's how the Lord himself as creator does continue to participate and guide that, and really allow us to envelop ourselves in his grandeur. And I think that's one of my favorite things there are amount of times that I've been motivated to get out of bed just because I know there's going to be a sunrise. And I think to not immediately or to put ourselves in that kind of natural context does help us to then have a sense of receptivity and a disposition that we are able to enter into prayer or even into the rest of our day with a certain humility. So I found myself, once I'm able to force myself physically out of bed, turn the alarm clock off, grab a cup of coffee, and then I'm in front of the window reading, praying, and keep checking the sun as it rises, helps me to approach the day with a deep sense of humility. So I would encourage those types of patterns and habits.
That makes me think of the last little video montage at the end of the exhibit at the St. John Paul II Shrine here in Washington, D.C., where St. John Paul II talked about how he liked to get up just simply to watch the sunrise. And for a man who was a kind of icon of hope for, like a generation plus of Catholics, I think there's a kind of hope associated with the sun, a hope associated with the morning, which spills into our Christian life and our Christian prayer.
It's beautiful. One of my favorite things. So thank you to all of our listeners, and thank you to you for listening to the totality of this episode of Godsplaining. Please follow us on all of the social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever else that we're on all of them. So please subscribe, follow, like, comment, subscribe to this video or this episode, and leave a 5-star review. It really does help us, and we appreciate reading those comments and enjoy the engagement interaction with them. If you'd like to donate to the podcast, please do so through our Patreon page. The link to that Patreon is in the description or the show notes of this episode. You can also follow that link in the description to shop our Godsplaining merchandise and to get more information on upcoming Godsplaining events. Speaking of those events, we do have an upcoming men's retreat the second weekend of second weekend of August in Brevard, North Carolina. Father Patrick and Father Bonaventure will be leading that retreat, and so we're excited and invite any of our male listeners to consider joining the two of those hosts down in North Carolina for that retreat. Once again, follow the link in the description to our website for more information on that retreat and other upcoming live events. Thank you for listening. We appreciate all the support and the prayers, and know that we are praying for you as well. God bless.
Father Jacob Bertrand.
Father Gregory.
A Dominican, a Franciscan, a Jesuit walk into a bar. One of them asks the audience to subscribe. That's not a joke. Any ways you can improve upon it?
Just don't tell jokes.
Right. This is not a joke. Please subscribe. Cheers.